Hello, hello everyone. I hope everybody is doing well. Huh. There you go. All right. I was wondering if it was live or not. Yes, so I hope everybody is doing well. Today is a bit of a crazy day because tomorrow I am leaving for London to go to ARC. And so yeah, it's a bit wild. For those who don't know what ARC is, so ARC is something that Jordan Peterson initiated a few years ago with the idea of, let's say, creating a different story for the future, creating a different vision of what the situation is, creating a different way, a different narrative, maybe is the best way to understand it, in terms of the kind of, you could say, takeover of the kind of diversity, equity, inclusion idea, as well as the kind of out of control anti-human environmentalism that we see in the globalist institutions like the UN and the WF and all that. And so the idea was to create a group of people that would come together and try to formulate a different vision. And so Jordan asked me if I could be part of the committee, the advisory board, and I accepted. But it's very odd. I mean, it's very odd because all of a sudden I was thrown into a world that I never, that I didn't know about, that I didn't totally understand. But that's fine. It's okay. And so now, that now on the advisory board, although I've never met them, there's like, Vivek, what is his name? I forget his last name. Anyway, so Vivek and also Mike Johnson, who was just elected as Speaker of the House in the United States, as well as other people, of kind of high political standing. So it's very particular. Anyway, so I'm looking forward to it, definitely. We're going to do this event at the O2 with Douglas Murray and Bjorn Lomberg, where there'll be, I think, like 12,000 people or something like that. And so, yeah, so that is happening. All right. Yeah, so as you know, the way this works is I will answer questions from the people that are supporting me. $10 or more people can ask questions in advance, and those questions go on the Symbolic World Forum. And for people who want to show up live, then I will also be taking questions from the chat as well. So you can put your question in the chat, and yeah. So Christopher Pino says, "What's up, Jonathan? ARC sounds awesome. Big question: how in the world did you make that lock on your spinning carving?" Yeah, so Christopher is talking about my carving table. I didn't make that table. Someone made it for me. My cousin, actually, who's actually an aerospace engineer, but he made that for me as a gift. And basically, the way it works is it's a what do you call it? Lazy Susan. It's like this thing that people put on the table with with how do you call that? Anyways, my brain isn't helping me today. With bearings in the thing, like this big like wheel with bearings in it, and that it turns on bearings, and the clamp just basically clamps two pieces of wood together with rubber as a kind of really like the way that a bike brake works, where like it just kind of crushes it with two pieces, the piece of rubber on the outside and a piece of rubber on on like this clamp, and it just stops the wood. So the clamp basically pulls a thread and it just clamps it together. Anyways, that's how it works. I sorry if I can't give you any better technical details. I'm not very good at the technical details. And so yeah, so Matt Hylam is here. You can check out Matt's music. And Christopher Pino, I mentioned him last time. He's the one making those wild Orthodox T-shirts with the different saints. So it's good to see everybody. Let's see. All right, so Christopher says that he's got the Lazy Susan and the Bolt track, but the design on the lock was stumping me. Thanks. All right, well, good to go. Good to go. All right, so let's get into the questions on the board. Sorry, I just have to scroll through here. So don't forget, it's the best thing to do is to put in your questions on the Circle community well in advance, because then what will happen is people will have a chance to people will have a chance to like it, and I just go from likes. So I start with the most likes, and I move down, and then when I run out of time or run out of breath, and I stop. And I can never get through all the questions because there's always like 70 questions or something like that. Usually I end up going through about 50 questions. So that's how it goes. All right. And so we're going to start with Wyatt Lawrence. So what Wyatt says, thoughts on trick-or-treating. What is the symbolism of children dressing up in costumes, going to strangers' homes, and requesting a good thing or a bad thing? And so I would say you should check out, if you're a patron, and if you're asking questions, it means you're a patron. I have made videos about that. I don't know if they're public or not, but I did have made videos on Halloween, on the symbolism of trick-or-treating and the symbolism of dressing up and everything. And really what it is, this is, yeah, so really what it is, what's happening at Halloween is basically monsters coming to people's houses and being asked to be paid off to leave. That's what's going on in trick-or-treating. So, you know, it's a form of appeasing demons. Everybody's gonna be like, what? And then Jonathan, says that it's okay to celebrate Halloween, but that's what is happening at Halloween. So Halloween is a kind of play where we're showing how it works in terms of appeasing the demons. As you can understand it as like temptations as well. Think about it. That's how you deal with addictions, right? The addiction comes, and then it says basically, give me something or I'm going to destroy you. I'm going to wreck your life. And so it's like, you smoke your cigarette, you do whatever, and then the demon goes away and then comes back. That's how desires work. And so it's basically helping us understand the process of death, like how death functions and how we keep desire at bay by giving it something sweet, you could say. And how those things are dangerous. And so we always have to understand that Halloween doesn't make any sense without All Saints Day, which comes later. Because ultimately the All Souls and All Saints are the answer to the Halloween. Halloween is the carnival. It kind of shows you the dark side or the upside down part of death, or the kind of the carnival-esque aspect of death. But then after that you have All Souls and All Saints, and then that shows you the proper approach to death and the proper relationship to the dead. And so but that's what's going on in trick-or-treating. All right, and so let's go with freaking out as I'm saying appeasing demons. By the way, I know that sounds weird for people when I say it's appeasing demons, but the problem is that although we're not meant to do that, we do it all the time, right? Everybody appeases demons constantly. It's something that happens in your life. You don't even realize that you're doing it, but you're constantly doing that kind of stuff. So it's actually something like Halloween makes the process visible and conscious and kind of brings it out into the light, so that it can be put in its proper place as well. And so the fact that we're doing it as a kind of play, as a kind of carnival, also, like I said, it exposes it in its right light, and it helps us. Hopefully, it helps you see that is something we do all the time, but it's also ultimately not the real truth about how reality should lay itself out. So. All right, so Ethan Densely asks, how's the symbolism of the long lifespans, Adam, Methuselah, Noah, in the Old Testament best understood? Any similarity, contrast with the dramatic exits of Enoch and Elijah? So the best way to understand it is to realize that after the death, after the fall, you have these characters that come up to 1,000 years, but they don't. They never reach 1,000 years. So you can understand it in terms of numerological symbolism, that 1,000 years would represent something like a totality or an age or a fullness. And what happens is, as the fall increases, that fullness diminishes. And so people come right up to it, but never reach it. And so the length of life of the people should be understood as something like people who are closer to fullness than we are. And that although they're not in the garden, they're closer to the garden, you could say, as the fall is increasing. And then after the end of the first world, with the flood, then after that you have the 120 years, basically. That the 120 years becomes the basic limit of the human lifespan. But before that, it's implied that it's 1,000. Although, like I said, it's not said directly, but it's kind of implied because you can see characters come right up to that. And so that's the best way to understand it. It's really to just understand that the characters before the flood are closer to a kind of totality and are closer to the garden as well. All right, and so Drew Straker in the chat says, can you talk a bit about divine darkness? Is this something that has analogs, different levels of reality? Does it have something to do with the waters above? And so, yes, it does have something to do with the waters above. They're not the waters above, but your insight is right, is that there is in some ways a kind of divine darkness, which is around all beings. And so in some ways it is you could call it the kenosis of the being, the way in which the being empties itself. That is its darkness. And so the darkness appears there's a darkness below and there's a darkness above, and they're not the same, although there's a relationship between the two, which is difficult to grasp, and we have to be careful with grasping that relationship, because it has in some ways been the cause of so much error and so much heresy in the past, which is confusing the relation, mixing up the distinction between the lower darkness and the higher darkness, and also not understanding how they connect has been such a stumbling stone for all the esotericists out there. But so you can understand it as a kind of dark glory, maybe is the best way to understand it. There's a relationship between the way in which you empty yourself going down, right? As you kind of move towards non-being, going down, your qualities, the qualities of a being, diminish until they vanish, until they cease to exist. And that is its own darkness. Like it's its own darkness, because it's the place where its qualities cease to exist, as they diminish, you could say. So it's not there's nothing, I know it sounds very weird and esoteric, but it's not weird. It's like there's a chair, and then there's a scale of the chair, and there are qualities of the chair, but you move away from those qualities. At some point you have things which are almost a chair, not quite a chair, a broken chair, residues of a chair, remainders of a chair. Then at some points it's just no longer a chair. And so when it's no longer a chair, when you no longer see the chair from something that was the chair, you have something like its death or its darkness, because it has basically evacuated itself into non-being. But that is also true to the manner in which it participates in higher identities. So there's a manner in which all beings give themselves up also and evacuate their being up towards higher identities. And that could be something like a higher form of darkness, right? A kind of ecstatic darkness, you could call it. And that ecstatic darkness, that is the way in which the chair disappears into its functionality, right? It's like a good way to Heidegger had some insights about this. It's like if you, how can I say this? It's like, to some extent, the manner in which the chair becomes mostly the chair is when it's forgotten, is when you stop thinking about the chair. When you're sitting on a chair and you stop thinking about the fact that you're sitting on a chair and that you are engaging with someone and you're talking or you're eating or whatever, and the chair disappears into the conversation, then it's darkness. It's higher darkness, right? It's the way in which it's given itself up into higher participations. It's the way in which it has been forgotten, you could say, but forgotten not in a bad way, forgotten in the way as in fully kind of subsumed into its higher participation. So that is, and it doesn't mean that it stops existing, but it exists in full submission, you could say, and in a kind of humble, a kind of humility that is its higher glory, you could say. So that is true of everything, and understanding that, is, and you could say, and this is the weirdest thing about that, is that when a chair achieves that, when a chair disappears into its higher participation, it is actually being the most chair that it can be, is when it moves into its own darkness, its own higher darkness, and that is also true of us, and it can help you understand why the paradox of Christianity and the paradox of humility in Christianity, which is that, as the saint becomes humble and actually diminishes himself and gets taken up ecstatically into the life of God, vanishes into God, you could say. But if it's proper, it means that it would also be the highest form of himself, and that the person will become the most itself at the same time, which is, like I said, which seems paradoxical, but once you kind of understand it, you can see that that's actually how reality works. So, yeah. All right. Yeah. So Matt Hylam in the chat says you can't ever reach the top. That's the right way to understand it. It's like the top of you and the top of all beings is the manner in which it gives itself up higher. And so it's actually an extinction. It's a kind of death that is at the top of the mountain. And that's the mystery, right? That's the mystery of and it's also life. Like we have to be careful. It's not a kind of nihilism. It's also the tree of life, but it kind of has to go through a tree of death, you could say. It appears as a giving up of itself. So anyways, like, this is the kind of thing that people will clip and say that I'm just saying gibberish, but hopefully that people in this conversation here in the Q&A have heard enough of what I'm saying to see where I'm going with this. So, yeah. Gohar M says the chair had an ego death. Yeah, that's a good way of understanding it. Oh, despite the often, how can I say this, the kind of popular culture discussion about ego death there. All right, so Johnny Robb on the Circle community asks, to what extent do you feel symbolism and meaning has been lost in biblical text by its translation into English? I've been reading about how early Semitic language evolved from Sumerian, and it's striking how much words and letters have changed and become detached from their original pictorial meaning. Have you considered reading the Bible in Hebrew or Greek to try to unlock deeper meaning? And so I think you're right. I think you're right. I think that nothing gets, it's not that everything gets lost, but there is definitely an insight. I mean, my brother Matir, has gained massive insight into being able to read the text in Hebrew. And so I think that there are definitely very deep symbolism in the Hebrew text, but there's also a reason why the Old Testament was translated into Greek, moving towards Christianity. And it has to do with power, I think. This is a weird thread I'm on here. I did this video recently about the exchange between ritualization and power, and that in some ways, as you cut certain ties into meaning, like some ties, you actually sometimes gain more access to the world. You kind of broaden your impact. And I think that the fact that the Gospels were written in Koine, for example, and the fact that the Old Testament was translated into Greek has something to do with that. So I think there's both a value in the connecting to, let's say, the type of symbolism that would be contained in the Hebrew letters, but there's also a great insight that comes from being able to embody that in the lowest form possible. Yeah, and I think Christianity tends to do that a lot. Christianity tends to want to take the highest and kind of embody it in the lowest. And that's why I think the gospel, like I said, was written in Koine. It's also, I think, what Dante was trying to do by writing his poem in Italian rather than in Latin. And it's what I'm trying to do with these fairy tales and with God's dog and all of that is, comic books were the lowest of arts, in the 20th century. They were the throwaway art. And so I think the idea of let's say, embodying the highest symbolism into these lower forms is something that I'm interested in. All right. All right, so Ross Bird says, in Matthew's genealogy, Jesus is said to be the son of Joseph, who is the son of Jacob, which draws the mind to the Joseph of Genesis. Obviously, Jesus is in the line of Judah, not Joseph. But in many ways, Jesus seems to embody Joseph, who redeemed Judah through a long, benevolent trick, which led to his repentance. How much do you think we should read into the symbolism of Jesus' father's name? Seeing Jacob, Joseph, Jesus at the end of the genealogy almost seems like a renewed cycle, plus symbolic meaning seems to count for more in Jesus' genealogy since he's not blood related to his father. Yeah, good point there, Ross. It's like symbolism definitely matters in the genealogy of Jesus because Joseph is not his father. That makes a lot of sense. And I think you're right, that it's interesting because the rabbinical Judaism in its own way, and especially kind of more mystical Judaism, they came to talk about the Messiah in terms of two Messiahs, which is the Messiah, son of Joseph, and the Messiah, son of David. And in some ways, you can understand it in terms of the story, the way in which those two Messiahs function very differently, which is that, David comes from the outside, you could say, right, is the youngest, is the legitimate, the hidden king that is not that at first is not outside, that almost seems like an enemy to the king, but then ultimately comes to found Jerusalem and to plan the temple. And so you have this one image of the Messiah, and then you have the image of Joseph, that is the legitimate son, the beloved son, who is then and also David is also the beloved son in another way. God calls him his son. And so Joseph is taken out and goes into Egypt and then hides amongst the Egyptians, becomes an Egyptian for all means and for all intents and purposes, and then ultimately deceives even his brothers. His brothers can't recognize him while he is an Egyptian. And then while he's an Egyptian, he saves Egypt first. And then once he's saved Egypt, then even through a kind of trick, he saves his own brothers. And saving the brothers comes at the end. And so you can understand that Jesus is definitely the son of Joseph, right? Jesus is the Messiah, son of Joseph, because Jesus saved the Egyptians. Jesus was thrown out by his own brothers, sold to the strangers, left for dead or put down into the pit, killed and put down into the pit, and then sold to the strangers. And then he went to Egypt, he went to Rome, and he saved Rome. and he became a Roman. And then Jesus became a Roman. And if you look at icons of Jesus, he's dressed as a Roman, just like Joseph was dressed as an Egyptian. And he saved the Romans. And he saved the Romans in a way, to an extent that then his own, the those that had sold him no longer were able to recognize him, and still can't recognize him. And so how is that all going to end? We'll see how it all ends. I think the story at least rings very true to me in terms of, to the extent to which Jesus looks like Joseph is astounding. And the fact that he is the son of Joseph is very important. But he's also the son of David. And that is also part of his symbolism as well, especially if you take the symbolism eschatologically. Like if you take all the symbolism of Christ from the birth in the stable all the way to the vision of the Son of Man, coming down to judge the world, you'll see that it's all there, but also David, yeah, anyways. So I don't want to go too much into that, but that's definitely important to understand. All right. So Dorothea K on the Symbolic World community says, this year a new Hayao Miyazaki movie came out titled The Boy and the Heron. Really? I didn't know. I didn't even see that. It is the story of a boy rescuing his mother from a tower. Is this the opposite of rescuing your father from the underworld? I guess this is the first movie in a long time to actually have a boy as the main character instead of a girl. In one of your videos, you said you like the characterization of women in Studio Ghibli movies, and I wanted to ask you to expand on that. What exactly makes them so compelling? And so, wow, I definitely have to check that out. I didn't know that a Miyazaki movie had come up. Like, I'm tempted to try to check it out right now. I'll do that later. But why do I think that his female characters are so good? It's because they're actually girls. I mean, they really are girls. Like, they have everything that's beautiful about the feminine is captured in the Miyazaki movies. This capacity to heal others, the capacity to bring peace, the capacity to join things together, and then also a kind of buoyancy and a kind of innocence that is really powerful, that is very beautiful. And so and a kind of desire for adventure, which is different. It's different from the one that the male characters have. It's more a kind of exploration of mystery, an exploration of mystery yeah. So I just think that he's really able. It's like if you're going to make an adventure movie with a female character, he's done it in a way that is just amazing, because everybody recognizes the truth of how he characterizes it, and everybody is impressed by, by what the characters are able to do, And so, but even like the themes of friendship and the themes of intimacy and all these beautiful themes that he's able to capture. Think about the character, the female character in Howl's Moving Castle. I mean, she basically saves Howl in very similarly to the way that the story of Beauty and the Beast goes. But she does it by supporting him, by giving him affection, by kind of just surrounding him with love and care, and even putting up with some of the Howl's annoying characteristics and his kind of self, his pathetic sometimes little self-indulgence that he has. And it's really surprising to watch those characters, how they're able to basically heal the people around them through love. And some people wish they could write a story like that. Like I wish I could write a story like that, where someone, it's such a Christian image of how you can heal others through love. I mean, that's amazing. So, and he seems to do it constantly. All right. All right, so Drew McMahon asks, "Hi Jonathan, can you comment on our current obsession with the oppressed? Why is our culture so obsessed with it? Every conversation, especially as it relates to politics, has to do with the oppressed and gets used as a point of leverage. What's going on? Is there any relationship to this verse in the Gospel of Matthew? But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing." Um, I mean, maybe, for sure. The obsession with the oppressed, the way that it's happening now, is something like an anti-Christian trope, which it sounds weird because anti-Christian in the strict sense, in the sense that it is something which comes from Christianity, but then opposes Christianity. That is, it's a kind of parasite of Christianity, something which looks at the outset like Christianity, but then turns against, becomes upside down. So René Girard noticed this himself, even when he started writing his books. He saw that. So the way he praised it was that once the scapegoat mechanism is exposed in the story of Jesus, that then you can't ignore it. It's like once you see it, you can't pretend like it's not there. And that the idea of the person that becomes a victim in order to justify our unity, and the outsider that is persecuted in order to justify our unity as a group, you just can't ignore it. But what happens in the weird obsession with the victims now is that it's framed in a revolutionary way, which is that the being a victim becomes a form of moral justification in itself, and becomes a justification to reproduce the type of behavior that the scapegoat mechanism itself brings about. So it's a very dark thing where, if you can portray yourself as a victim, then you are the morally justified one, and it justifies your moral actions if you are able to portray yourself as a victim and then portray others as oppressors. So it's very different from what Christ happened to Christ. I mean, Christ on the cross said, forgive them for they know not what they do. The Christian martyrs are known for loving the ones that murdered them, and that ultimately that's the final solution to the scapegoat problem, is not to reverse it, to make it upside down, and to now create a kind of upside down scapegoating where the oppressed and the persecuted can band together in order to now oppress their persecutors, or to get rid of them. That just leads to the same kind of madness, a kind of upside down version of scapegoating. The solution is to see yourself as the persecutor, and then to forgive those that persecute you. That's the solution. If everyone did that, then we would have healed the problem of identity. All right. All right, Julia Payne in the chat asks, Julie Payne, sorry, not Julia, Julie, says, "Clap your hands, all you people. I was wondering about the symbolism of clapping. I recognize the idea of approval, but could you speak to the idea of the right hand and the left hand coming together?" It's an interesting It's an interesting question. It has, I mean, for sure, it has to do with noise. It has to do with noise making, I think, more than it's like it's not the idea of the left and right coming together. Like that would be this, right? So it's like you have this. This is why this that image of prayer that people do. This is a great image. I mean, I don't do that. I don't know where it comes from, but like doing this is wonderful to understand what prayer is. It's like, basically the two sides coming together in unison and then focusing up. It's really good. But it's like it's this, right? And it's this, and it's like, you're clapping, and you're accelerating this motion, and you're making noise, and it has to do with also with like cheering and wooting and hooting and stuff when you're celebrating something, uh, and yeah, I'd have to think about it more because I don't think I I can see it. But it's kind of hazy to me. Why it is that we make noise to celebrate something? You know, there's a kind of jubilance of course, and so you could imagine that there are certain moments where it's not appropriate to clap. Like for example, you know, that's what, like, we don't clap in an Orthodox church. Like we would never clap in an Orthodox church. We would never clap at in moments that are very, very serious. It's like at the end. It has to do with the end too. Like at the end of something, you kind of wait at the end, and then there's like noise to a kind of jubilation about it. I have to think about it. It's a great question. It's a great question. Lisa Parrott says, "Thanks for teaching me to clap." Okay, I'm not sure exactly even what that means. Oh, because I'm telling you what to do. Oh man. All right. Okay. So let's continue on here. All right. So Norm Grondin on the Samacro community asks, any thoughts on John the Baptist's role as symbol as a bridge figure between the Old Testament and the New Testament? And so, yeah, well, John the Baptist he's like the end of the Old Testament. And so in some ways he is obviously he's the culmination of the prophetic tradition, but his role is also something like a sword, right? It's something like clearing the space. And so that's why he says that, make way for the Lord, clear out what's there before. It's something like what John the Baptist is captured in when Jesus goes into the temple and turns over the table and clears the temple out. And so that's basically, Christ did it once, and he had to encapsulate all of it. But John the Baptist, that's what he is. He's basically, repent, clear out, make way, get rid of the old world. Let's, prepare the way for the new. It's like, what else you could say? It's something like plow the field, right? Get the dirt ready, and then the seed is coming in order to be planted in it. And so that's why when you're baptized, for example, right? So Christ kind of completes baptism, you could say, in the story of Christ's baptism. So the others before, they would get baptized. It's like, clear out the way, repent from your sins, wash the things away, get rid of the bad structures, destroy the Tower of Babel, get rid of all the idols, make things clear. But then there's something missing, right? You need the thing from above to come down and plant the seed now into the new earth, And so that's why also John is like, the branch is ready to get cut. I'm going to cut down that tree. All the things that don't bear fruit are going to get cut down. But you're missing the last part, which is you need the seed from above to come down and land in that cleared space. And so when Christ comes out of the water, the Spirit of God descends and then lands on him. And that's the next step after baptism. And that's the you know, that's the culmination of what the process is. And so that's why in terms of a ritual, that's why we have baptism and chrismation. That's why we have baptism and confirmation. We have the two parts. Like you have in the Orthodox Church, you get baptized, right? You go down into the water, you clear everything out, then you come out, and then you receive the holy oil, right? You're anointed from above, you could say, and that's the next step. And so, uh, so you can see in all these different things that John the Baptist does, and also one of the things like John the Baptist criticizes the social order. He criticizes the political order. He criticizes the king and everything. Um, yeah. Anyway, so hopefully that helps you understand a little more. Lisa says, "I'm getting baptized soon." Oh, that's so amazing. That's so cool. All right. Yeah, Suzanne in the chat says a glory. We can't shine, but we can make noise. I think that's it. I think that's right. I think it's something like glory in the sense of a kind of exuberant energy that moves out, right? A kind of a little bit of a chaotic thing that's not directly connected. There's something about that, it's like in the relationship between death and glory. You know, definitely you're on to the right. You're on to the right. You're in the right direction. So Sarah Mary in the community says, "Why does everyone perceive time as going by so fast?" That's because that's because time accelerates at the end. I don't know what to tell you. It's just how it works. So think about a wheel. So you have a center of the wheel, and then you have spokes, and then you have the periphery of the wheel. And if you move from the center of the wheel and you move toward the periphery of the wheel, this the actual speed that the center is turning is null. The very center. It's not actually turning. But around the center is turning more. So the identity provides the axis provides identity for the wheel, and then the wheel turns around that axis. And the more you move away from the center, the faster it goes. And the bigger the wheel, the faster the margin goes, the faster the wheel turns as the bigger it gets. So for the same amount of pressure, you could say, from the middle. Uh, and so as we move further out in that's why even in your life, that's why time accelerates as you move towards death. So as a child, a day is like an eternity. If you can remember, it's like waiting for 15 minutes, when you're 6 years old is just crazy. It's like you can't imagine it. Uh, and it's like every day is just a whole world. And then the more you go in time, the more your life advances, the shorter the days appear to be. And you can see people, and it's this is completely normal. Like someone who lives until they're 95, everything they've done, everything they've kind of accomplished in their life happened before a certain age, and then after that, it's a kind of like like a succession of days that kind of fades out, but they don't have as much weight as you move forward in time. So you can think about it that way. It's like every moment isn't as pregnant as you move further away from the origin. The moments are just like little specificities of the identity, and so they have less ontological reality, ontological weight, you could say, and so they just goes faster. Uh, so so I think so. It's not like it. Like I said, it's obviously this is in consciousness. It's not. And if you measure the time, like in terms of just a clock or whatever, it'll be the same. But it's time is actually real time is actually experience time. It's not this weird stable thing that people measure. That's a derivative of actual time, which is experience duration. All right. Sam Pearson says, end of the world was 3 weeks ago. Now it's endless crisis UN Security Council meetings. It's always the end of the world to some extent. It's always, you always have to be careful, you know. But obviously there are bigger ends of worlds, you know. So, okay, so Jonathan Ott asks, why is David focused on defeating external enemies, i.e. Philistines, Amalekites, but refuses to defeat or kill internal enemies such as Saul and Joab, and even those who curse him? Yet at the end of his life, he has Solomon defeat the internal enemies. I just find it strange that he would leave that part to the next generation rather than handling them during his reign. So this is something. Okay, so a good way to understand this, it has to do with the way authority works. Maybe it's the best way to explain it. So authority comes from above. That's how authority functions. And if authority doesn't come from above, then it becomes cannibalistic, and it will lead to revolution and to death ultimately. So David knows that. David understands that. And so he understands that the process by which Saul is king is the same process by which he is meant to be king. And so if he kills Saul, then he is undermining the process that made him king. And so because of that, he cannot kill Saul. He cannot kill these internal enemies because like I said, his authority, it's undermining his own world. It would be a kind of suicide if he did that ultimately. But then when his son comes, Solomon receives in part his kingship from David. That is, the reason why Solomon is king is because King David was king. And so if David can confer that on Solomon, it means that now Solomon's reason for doing that comes from above, comes from the source of his kingship. And so he is no longer in danger of undermining his own authority. You know, because his kingship, he wasn't anointed out of the blue by Samuel. He was anointed, of course, but also because he was the son of David. So, like I said, I think it just has to do with the way in which authority functions. So hopefully that makes sense. Right, so Michael Wine says, I missed his... Oh yeah, you're right. My goodness. It's like, I can't believe, I'm probably forgetting questions all the time. So sorry, Michael. All right, I will take your question. So why was Jesus circumcised on the 8th day after birth? Specifically, why the 8th and not the 7th? My instinct is that it is the first day of a new week. On the day 1, God separated light from dark. So it is saying that the separation of circumcision is connected to the first day of creation. And so, yeah, you have the right insight. And you couldn't cut on the Sabbath. The Sabbath is the day of rest. And so the 8th day, or the beginning of the second week, is something like the second world as well. It's something like the world after the flood. You could understand it that way. It's like the world of the covenant that comes later. And so that's when you have to mark your affiliation to, outwardly to the let's say to the Israel, maybe the best way to understand it. To God through Israel is maybe the best way to understand it. And so this is this is the secret, right? The secret is, at least that's what I think. The secret is that circumcision is like the law, right? It comes later. It comes after the original covenant, which was And so there's a sense in which, like, circumcision is it's kind of like moving beyond the veil. It's like a removing of the veil in order to go into the inner space. But there's a way in which there's a mystery in which that if you were able to have it all, if you were able to have the, let's say, the circumcision of the heart, right, is the way that St. Paul talks about it, then you wouldn't need the law. You wouldn't need the second part of the pattern. You could keep the garments of skin, or you would regain them, or you would have them nonetheless. You wouldn't have to get rid of them ultimately. So it's kind of like it's the mystery of that you see in Saint Gregory of Nyssa as well, right? That I've talked about, which is that Saint Gregory of Nyssa removed the garments of skin until he reaches the summit and their final revelation. Then when he's there, then God basically gives him the plan of the tabernacle in which there are garments of skin. And it's like, okay, that's interesting. It's as if there's something about, yeah, there's some mystery. There's a mystery in there, but your insight is right. It has to do with a kind of a second world, one which is based on covenant and law and knowledge of good and evil, maybe good to understand it, right? A kind of judgment and cleaving. Yeah, but it's a very deep. The circumcision symbolism was very deep. It's hard to fully capture it. It's a very primordial. All right, and so Adrian Drozdek asks, Jonathan, do you enjoy this live monthly Q&A? What is strange. So the answer to that is that it depends. Like sometimes I really enjoy it, and then sometimes I find it difficult because it's quite it's demanding, and it's a lot of improvisation and answering sometimes really deep questions one after the other. And so sometimes if I'm tired, I find it really exhausting. But in general, I like it, and the reason why I like it is because at some point, you're sitting at home, you're in your own world, you're thinking about certain things, and you stop pushing yourself. Whereas these questions are helping you push yourself further and look at things you haven't looked for, consider things you haven't considered, and I think it's a sharpening. It's really a sharpening for me. All right, so Matthew F. says the Bible is structured in 7 parts by Christians: Torah, historical books, wisdom books, prophets, gospels, and Acts, epistles, Revelation. This seems to be the same as creation, but in reverse order. It's a 1-3-3 structure where the histories correspond to the earth, the wisdom literature to the waters, and the prophets to the heavens. Then the Torah is the 7th day, which combines all the days. Mix of history, wisdom, prophetic, just as the Sabbath is God's rest over the works. But why is the order reversed? Going Sabbath, earth, waters, heaven, earth, waters. I think this question is too complicated to answer on the fly. I would have to look at it and kind of understand, because I've never thought about this structure. So I don't totally understand why it's a 1-3-3. I don't understand what you mean by 1-3-3. Why is it 1-3-3? I'm sorry, I don't understand what you mean by the structure. So maybe it's because I can't pay attention to it properly. Sorry, Matthew. All right, so Elijah Stonebreaker says, hi, Jonathan. As a creative person with a wife and a full-time job, I find it hard to have a consistent pattern of work and creation to accomplish the finished writing that I've always dreamt about publishing. I have abandoned far more projects than I have completed and constantly lack motivation, synergy, energy, and discipline. I also do not have a consistent schedule, which makes building a specific creative time, like many writers suggest, very difficult. My biggest fear has always been not finishing what I view as part of my life's work. Have you had similar struggles and fears in your artistic endeavors, and how did you overcome them? Uh, huh. So I've had a I mean, I've dealt with it in a way that will probably be unsatisfactory to many people, which is that there came a time in my life where I really wished I was, let's say, making carving icons. And I thought that I would be in a situation where I could do that, which is I quit my job I was working in private sector in Montreal in a project management firm for like 5 years after college. And I went to Africa to work with artisans there. And I thought, wow, that'd be perfect. I'll be working with artisans. And so I'll be in contact with tools and wood and all these materials, and I'll be able to carve icons. And ultimately, that was just impossible. Like, it was just impossible for several reasons. And I just couldn't, and it would have been forced. And also, I had children. I started having small children, and it was just too much. And so, what I did is I just kept that on my heart. I don't know what to tell you. I just kept it as a prayer, and not try to get bitter, not try to force it, not try to get annoyed with the fact that I wasn't able to do the things I thought that I was meant to do. And you could say something like kept it as a prayer and then paid attention. And then doing that, at some point, the attention, I noticed that things were coming together for me to be able to do this again. And it just happened. I didn't make it happen. But when I saw the possibility of it happening, I was ready and I moved in that direction. And then it had fruits. Like it basically, I think it was fruitful. And one of the things you realize, by the way, this is something, especially if you're writing, you'll realize is that I think the idea that you should always be writing, I think that's BS. I don't think it's BS. I think that, I mean, maybe for some people that's how it works, but I would say it does, just because you're not writing doesn't mean that you're not writing up here. Doesn't mean that you're not ruminating on what you want to like the story or the vision that you have. And my impression is that if you're able to pay attention to the right moment, then what you're finally going to put together and write will be like refined gold. But if you have this weird idea that people have developed now, which is like you just have to write and write and write and write and write, and I think for some people that might not be true, but I think for most people that will lead to mediocrity. So I would say to keep your project and your idea in your heart, and to keep it as a prayer, and basically ask God to provide with the possibility of doing it, and be ready when it happens to move. And I think that if you do that, then, like, let me give you an example. So for example, I had the idea for God's Dog like in 2003, 2004, I think. That's a long time ago now. It's like almost 20 years ago. And then I was kind of on a break while I was in Congo. I came back to Canada, and I was on this break for a few months. I think it was my son was being bored, and I had the idea, and it was like, wow, that's an interesting idea. And then I didn't have time or energy to write it until 2000 and maybe 2008. Start writing in 2008 with my brother Mathieu, finishing it in 2009. And then basically, because of everything that happened in our lives, it just sat on the shelf then from 2010 to basically like 2015. 2015, 16 when I met Cord. No, 2017 when I met Cord. And then it took him years to be able to get the first book out. And that's how it is. And now, like now we're going to make the second book. And the fact that I've had all this time for it to ruminate and to meditate and to kind of to sit there and basically, ripen, I've been able to now for like the second book and the next books, I've been able to actually pull in things that we didn't have in the original screenplay, which I think are much better. And I think that it's actually going to be better than what it was at the outset. And so it depends. Like it just depends also what you want to do. I really think that for artists, aiming for excellence is always the best. It's much better than becoming a professional. And if you aim at excellence and you make beautiful, powerful things and you write beautiful, powerful stories, at some point that will produce fruits, I think. All right, so Suzanne A. But think about it though. Think about what I said. Like think about some of the authors that we know. If you write one good book, if you write one amazing novel that everybody loves, that's better than writing 20 novels that nobody cares about or that everybody will forget. That's way better. I don't know. To me, it seems like it's way much better. Maybe you want to find a middle ground between the two if you want to do that for a living, but, All right, so Suzanne A asks, hi, Jonathan. Abraham took wood, fire, and a knife to sacrifice Isaac. Isaac carried the wood, and Abraham presumably carried the fire and the knife. The deeper symbolism of wood and fire, I think you've often addressed, but what about the knife? I struggle to understand the symbolism of cutting a covenant. And what about the symbolism of all three items together? Yeah, that's too deep a question. I would definitely have to think about it because I know that it's a big deal, but I've never thought about the relationship between the things that they carried. Yeah, for sure the knife would be that which connects the fire and the wood together. In the sense that, well, not just the knife, but Isaac and the knife on Isaac. And it seems to have to do with it seems to have to do with some of the very strange images that we see in a lot of mythology. Like in some ways, the idea that something has to be cut in order to assure the stability. Like you have to cut it, and that has to do with naming too. Yeah, but man, the symbolism of sacrifice is always very, very deep, and I always feel like I don't totally see all of it. I kind of see aspects of it, sometimes they kind of shine, but then. All right, so Garrett Ransom Widner asks, hi, Jonathan, could you talk about the push-pull between asceticism and works creation? Specifically, when pursuing art, I have a sense that when pursuing ascesis, you're gathering, and when creating, you're releasing. What troubles me is the sense I get that one's entire life should be gathering, that releasing is almost wasteful and a lower thing, something that, if we were perfect, should be entirely reserved for the next world. Do you get this sense? Can you speak of this at all? So, yeah, I understand what you mean. And in some ways, the I think in some ways that's why craft and arts are seen as part of the fall, as part of the progress towards the flood, and that they're related to death and to darkness in some ways, and they're kind of this breakdown. But so let's take your question. Let's take your question and frame it in another way. So you could say, on the one hand, there's the asceticism, the prayer, and the relationship with God. And on the other hand, there's the good work that I do and the love that I show to my brothers and sisters. And so you could, if you think of it that way, then you can kind of understand why, you will know my children by how they love each other. Like, you will know a tree by its fruits. And so, although the treeness, although the gathering, although the ascesis is ultimately in that in which you acquire the salvation, or that in which you kind of enter into the heart, you could say, that also has to flow out. And so it's like, if you move into the heart and you encounter the light of God, and you encounter the voice of God, then that has to reflect itself on the outside. And so the arts and the creation is that reflection, whether on an individual level, well, not just that, also just the good works we do in general, like the helping the poor, the caring for the weak, the caring for others. All of that is part of the externals that are anchored to the inside. So that's the way to understand it. And so so both individually and socially, the life of the church is not the life of the church is not the mosaics and the frescoes and the golden chalice. That's not the life of the church. It's the fruits of, right? It's that which flows out of the life of the church, the beauty, and then this kind of overflowing. But you can't limit, of course. And so the tension exists always in Christianity. You're always seeing it, which is, this idea of, like, not to, St. John Chrysostom, says it, basically, we're asked to care for the poor, and we're asked to love others, and we shouldn't be so focused on covering our altars with gold. But if there is gold, then that is, like, if there is gold in the end, then we should also do that. We should, the temple and the things we make should reflect the connection to the inner part. So hope that makes sense. So Michael Wine says, some say to write well, you have to write a lot and improve your skills. Seems like there's something to that, but I also think reading and ruminating can help with quality as well. Yeah, reading will help you write well more than writing. Like, honestly, I think so. So yeah, obviously you should write. You should understand grammar. You should understand the phrases and how to do things. But I don't think that. I think that reading and ruminating is what will differentiate your writing from everybody else. So Sean Desmond says, hi, Jonathan. Can there be a loose equivalence drawn between the poor, as Christ talks about in the Gospels, and the marginal, as you talk about in your videos? Yeah, they're exactly the same. They are. The poor and the marginal are the same. The poor is actually a better way to understand what the margin is. It's like, the poor is those that lack. That's what the poor is. And the marginal are those that lack identity, that lack connection, that lack a connection to the top, to the structure, to the nation, to the group, to the church. They're the marginal. And so they are, and that's the same as what the poor is. So it can help you understand. So P.P. Bailey, Josh's wife, are all periods of history equally worth studying, or would you say there's a hierarchy? Asking from a planning homeschool point of view. Yeah. Uh, no, I think that we talked a little about how time accelerates, and time accelerates for idiosyncrasy as well. And so, there's a reason why. Let's say if you look back in history, things are going to reduce, right? And so, right now, you have access to all the geopolitical realities, all the state conflicts, all the little national identities, everybody, and all these little conflicts and all this stuff. So if you wanted to like study world affairs and geopolitics, that could be your life. Your whole life could just be trying to kind of understand geopolitics and all the complexity of the current moment and the speed at which it changes. But if you look back into the past, what you'll notice is, first of all, things will reduce and things will actually slow down, where, you'll start to be able to clump together entire centuries, entire millennia into one identity, because you can see it from afar. And that which has been remembered has to be, put through a kind of sieve where the important things are remembered and the idiosyncratic and secondary things are forgotten. So that means that looking back into the past, the far past, is important, not in terms of the way the anthropologists do it or the way the archaeologists do it. That's really not that useful. But in terms of story, in terms of the memory we have of these ancient people, that is important. And that, in some ways, I think that in terms of homeschooling, you should start with that. You should start with exploring with your children the classical world, the mythical memories, the ancient text, the Bible, the Greek stories, also the Sumerian stories, all that stuff. That's more important at the outset, because what it does is that, because it's in the past of memory, right? It's not just the past in a general sense. It's that which we remember from the past that's connected to us. It means that it also acts as the source and in some ways the judge of what is happening now. And so what you're doing when you're teaching your kid ancient history is you're basically exposing them and fine-tuning the frame in which they'll understand the modern world now. And so once you and the patterns are clear in the past because they've been remembered and refined over centuries. So studying the Peloponnesian War to some extent, or studying the way the Roman Empire developed itself, is a better understanding of politics than studying today what's going on today around us. And it can help you understand what's happening now, because it's, like I said, because it's acting as an origin for what happened now. All right? I hope that makes sense. All right, so David Michael Ballinger asks, my question is largely inspired by the Bible Project's current Chaos Dragon podcast series, which points out that while darkness, chaos, water, wilderness have no place in new creation, they are part of the first creation, which was affirmed as good. Should we therefore understand that suffering, chaos, death is integral to the present cosmos, with an ordained, purposeful, ethical role at the edge? Is this also spoken by the notion that Christ was creating the cosmos as he was crucified? So, yeah, it's a very, very, they have a good insight about that question. But let me just check something. So, all right, so let me just see something. Give me 2 seconds. I think that insight is right. it's there's a mystery in the darkness. Like, it's not that we have to be careful. It's not that suffering and death is good. Chaos or potential is not death. There's a relationship between the two. But it's not the same. First of all, it's important to see that when God creates heaven and earth, he doesn't say that it was good. First of all, like, you have to separate that from the creation of light on the first day. I think there's a separation, because it says in the beginning God created heaven and earth, and it's kind of like beyond good. It's beyond good and evil in some ways, or beyond good and bad, or whatever. And so it's not clear that the earth, that the chaos is good. In some ways, the chaos can't be good, because that's not what good is. Good is identical to identity. Good and identity are the same thing. There's no difference between the two. And so chaos cannot be good. And it doesn't mean that it can't have a kind of mysterious role to play in transformation and in but it would not be right to say that chaos is good. So the image at the end that there's no ocean left is very mysterious. Like, it's a very mysterious thing, and it's kind of terrifying, because it's very difficult to understand what exactly this means. It means that it's fullness. Like, it means it's as if all has been filled with God, and the union of heaven and earth is complete, and that everything is full. But the fact that there's no more buffer, and that there's no more ambiguity, is really a little frightening to me. I don't totally understand. Like, I don't completely get it in terms of what that implies. So, yeah. It'd be worth thinking about more, but I'm not sure we can totally understand it. As a trope, it's good to maybe understand that it's something like fullness, right? In the sense that potential is now a mirror. Like, it's now crystal. Like, the sea is crystal, and the sea of crystal reflects the heavens perfectly, and there's no more division. It's more, everything is framed as unity between the two. Something like that. But so Ethan B asks, was there a created world outside the garden prior to the fall, or is it simultaneously created with the fall as it occurs? That's a really interesting question, and a good insight, that for sure there's a sense in which creation isn't finished when God finishes creation. There's a sense in which man is there to continue creation and to participate in the creative act by naming the animals. And the fact that Saint Ephrem the Syrian has the animals outside of the garden is very interesting as well, to understand that. In some ways, it's as if there's a hierarchy in creation, and the world, although it's created, it still needs something in order to fully participate, and it kind of needs man's naming, which is an extension of God's creation. So this is something that I've pondered a little bit in terms of also understanding. I mean, it's related to the question we mentioned before, which is that there's a way in which there's something of chaos which is still there after creation that still has to be kind of dealt with. And it's the waters, it's the outer waters, it's the monsters, it's all that. Yeah, and so that's why there's a hint. It's not to say that there's death before the fall, because that leads us into all kinds of trouble. But there's something akin to that. There's something akin to a continuation of the bringing in of chaos and transformation of it, and making it named, that appears in creation. And so death would be something like being given up to that chaos which has not been totally, let's say, fully brought into the kingdom, maybe is the best way to understand that. And so that can also possibly give us some solutions to a lot of yeah, I've talked about this before. People try to reconcile like the creation narrative and more kind of scientific descriptions of processes. Anyways, that could be a way that I think that could be an interesting way to reconcile it. Someone would have to work on it a bit to work it out better than I have just now. All right. Okay, so Mitch Meyer asks, what does St. John mean when he says that there are some sins which lead to death and some that do not? Wondering how this squares with your understanding of sin, for reference. 1 John 5:16. And so, I mean, I think it's just an observation of what happens. It's like, that because there's some things we do and some sins that we fall into, sometimes even without knowing, that won't dominate us, right? That this happens and then it kind of goes away. But there are some sins that enslave us, and then those sins are the ones that lead us to death because they take over and and they kind of suck the life out of us. They suck our purposes out of. I mean, it's very practical. If you have a certain, let's say, if you're prideful, if you're systematically prideful, then that will suck the life out of you. It'll take away your joy. It'll take away your place in the world. It'll make you resentful because people don't treat you the way that you think they should. It'll start to dominate you. It will, it'll make you hate others and have contempt for others, et cetera, until you're dead. Basically, you're broken away from others. You've been cut off. You're staring down at death. So, and that's true for all kinds of sins, but you can sin sometimes. Like, you can have a moment of pride and catch yourself and ask for forgiveness, and that won't lead you to death. And death is a real thing. Death is a real thing that happens to you. Death is not just some like weird thing that was declared at Genesis that nobody really knows what it is except for like separation from God or whatever. Like the idea that these kind of weird ideas that we have, it's like death is actually something that happens to you. So when you sin, you're playing with death. And if you sin too much, or if you fall into sin there and sin really captures you, then it'll destroy you. And that will happen to you. Like in real life, it will make you obsessed and bitter and hateful and full of despair, and that will be some real thing that happens to you. So I think that's important because we're still stuck sometimes with these weird forensic descriptions of saying, like, oh, the wages of sin is death, and it means that, like when you die, you're going to go to hell. That's what that means. But it's like, no, that's not what that means. It means that the wages of sin is death. It means that if you sin, then you will die, and that will happen to you, not just after in another world or whatever. It's going to happen to you right now. It's going to be part of your life. Death will start to encroach on your joy, on your life, on your hope, on your love. All of the virtues will begin to erode if you give in to sin. Yeah. All right, so I think this might be the last question, everybody. So Josh Bailey says, hi, Jonathan. Mathieu gives washing feet and the Sabbath as an example of time and space correctly balanced. Recently in work, I felt a pattern of constant space construction, then being overwhelmed by an almost involuntary rushing of time, pointless deconstruction, which is sometimes accompanied by laziness, by temptations to laziness, entertainment, binging, etc. Yeah. The renewing part is rare. How do you follow a pattern of correct balance with the ridiculous number of things you are fitting into everyday week? And so I struggle with that as much as anybody. Like I struggle with that, just like all of you, which is, yeah, and it's exactly the same. It's like you kind of, you work hard and you do all these things and you end up falling into the opposite, which is distraction, right? You distract yourself. Yeah, you watch series or movies or whatever, or you play video games or whatever it is that we do, and then that that kind of takes over, and it's not very refreshing. I think for sure the importance is finding the right balance, and also kind of doing it in a way that has a rhythm to it. That's probably the best. And so being careful not to let those the more restful aspects of our life kind of move into all the parts of us. It's harder sometimes, especially if you're probably similar to me, which is that you have your own schedule, and so you have things you need to do, but you kind of do them the way you want, and so there's nobody there to like tell you do this, do that, and so sometimes that can be difficult because you don't have an external. You're not like in a monastery. Like in a monastery, they would tell you, it's like, well, you don't have a choice. Now's the time to go work. Now's the time to pray. Now's the time to sleep. Like, and then usually in that context, whatever moments of pointless distraction that you would have would probably play the right role of being a kind of refreshment. But for us, it's harder. So I'm sad. I'm afraid I'm afraid that all I can say is that the best way to do that is to be able to start your day well and have the right direction, to start with prayer. And that will at least help align your day properly so that you don't exaggerate in terms of work, and you don't kind of work yourself to death. And then you also won't then use that as an excuse to kind of give in to distraction, to constant distraction. So hopefully that will help, All right, everybody. So thanks for showing up. And so next time we talk, it'll be after ARC, so I'll be able to give you a kind of inside scoop at what happened and my perception of it and everything that went on. And we're also going to be starting the God's Dog 2 crowdfunder in a few weeks, and so pay attention to that. I'm really excited about moving forward with that story as well. In book 2, in book 1, it was really like almost like an introduction to the story, and then in book 2, now we really get into the more epic aspects of the story, and also the consequences of bringing in this monster into the group. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how people react to that. And so don't forget, also Snow White is still available. You will get your books in November if you order them still now. So if you haven't ordered books, go for it, because you can still get them for Christmas. And then finally, don't forget the Symbolic World Summit at the end of February. This is going to be the greatest thing. It's going to be so cool to have all these people that are around the Symbolic World in one place, including so many people that you've seen on my channel, but then also a lot of you that I met here in the chat, that I've seen on Patreon, or that I've exchanged with on different places. It's going to be awesome. I'm definitely looking forward to that. So thanks everybody, and we'll talk to you very soon. Bye-bye.